Water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, 100 degrees Celsius at sea level. That's under the gentle crush of Earth's atmosphere, 14.7 pounds per square inch. It's a massive ocean of gases constantly pushing down on us. But climb to the summit of Mount Everest, the rooftop of the world, and that pressure drops to a mere 4.5 psi. Just like the ocean, there is far more pressure the lower you go. So, way up above the clouds and the densest part of the atmosphere, water doesn't need to reach 212 degrees to boil. It only needs to get to 157 degrees Fahrenheit, or 70 degrees Celsius. In fact, water will indeed boil at room temperature if the pressure is only about half a psi. Now let's leave Earth altogether with that in mind and step into the silent vacuum of space, where pressure is practically non-existent. There, water boils at the frigid temperature of minus 155 degrees Fahrenheit, or minus 100 degrees Celsius. And consider this. At our precise distance from the Sun, 93 million miles, anything exposed to direct sunlight reaches a blistering positive 250 degrees Fahrenheit, or 120 degrees Celsius. So ask yourself, what happens to the boiling point of water when you drop the pressure by a factor of 3, and then more than double the temperature, from minus 155 degrees Fahrenheit to positive 250 degrees Fahrenheit? It doesn't just boil. It erupts, violently vaporizing, then freezing in an instant, as it's blasted apart into its smallest molecules. It would be a stunning, chaotic display. Beautiful, terrifying, and utterly impossible to survive. And yet Earth is filled with water. Vast bodies and rivers inside the Earth, every ocean, every lake, even the air carries it. So we must ask, not only, how did it get here, but once it did, how could it possibly remain, without absolutely everything in place to protect it from day one? Because wherever it supposedly came from, comets, asteroids, the dusty void, none of those places can hold so much water like Earth does in one place. Not in these quantities, not in this balance, not with this precision. And yet, here it is. We can all agree the water is here. And not just a little, but a vast, planet-spanning abundance of about 1.4 billion cubic kilometers of it. So let's set aside, just for a moment, the fact that it is wildly unreasonable for such an enormous volume of deuterium-free water to exist on this one planet. Let's also ignore for now the devastating consequences life and water would face without the protection of Earth's magnetosphere and the ozone layer guarding us from the sun's relentless radiation. Because Earth does have a magnetosphere, a vast, invisible force field stretching tens of thousands of miles into space, deflecting deadly solar winds and cosmic rays, shielding every living thing. But here's something few people know. That shield is failing. The magnetosphere is decaying at an exponential rate, a loss of roughly 10% in just the past 180 years. Now, let's roll the clock backward. If we rewind time by just 15,000 years and return the field strength it would have lost by now, an increase of over 180,000%, what do we find? A planet trapped in a kind of electromagnetic oven. At that strength, the magnetic field wouldn't just shield from radiation, it would over-deflect it, disrupting solar cycles, causing unbearable cosmic ray penetration and wreaking havoc on the balance of space weather. Cellular biology would be under constant assault by extreme electromagnetic forces. Electric currents within Earth's crust and core would be magnified to such a degree that they could destabilize the very geology of the planet, triggering extreme volcanism, seismic chaos, and tectonic instability. Compass needles? Useless. Migratory species? Lost without orientation. Neural signals in living organisms? Drowned in magnetic interference too severe for brains or nerves to function. Yes, it's true that Earth's magnetic poles have flipped in the past. But contrary to hopeful speculation, there is zero evidence and no known physics suggesting the field gains energy from anything during a flip, or ever for that matter. Everything we observe tells us it has only ever weakened and will continue to do so, as it has for all of time. Because its decay is so steady and does not recharge, adding its strength back according to its decay rate complicates the idea that Earth's magnetic field could have been that powerful even as recently as 20,000 years ago. It defies physics. The energy output required would rival that of a neutron star, and Earth does not have the mass required to create a field of such enormous amounts of energy. Our field strength is just right, and doesn't have the physical nature to be as ancient as some forcefully postulate, in defiance of the data. And yet here we are, alive, protected, balanced on the edge of magnetic forces that shouldn't be sustainable over time, and yet somehow we are. It's a strange thing, that many can stomach the idea of life, in all its balance and complexity, emerging from billions of years of decay, but struggle to accept that it might have been designed. Whether it began 6,000 years ago, or 20 billion, the truth remains. Everything we see is a miracle when weighed against everything we know about science. Why is intelligent design in nature so hard to accept? When we, the natural beings ourselves, intelligently design things all the time. And yet, rather than submit to the idea of a higher intelligence, there are those who suggest that this entire universe, full of law, order, and breathtaking structure, probably came from a vast explosion, from nothing. They claim somehow that nothing, waited in no place where time did not exist, to allow for an unfathomably large probability to occur without a place or a single second of time to tick, so that nothing could explode into everything, and not just any explosion. An explosion with such unfathomable precision that it neither collapsed in on itself nor dispersed into the vast reaches of the universe too fast. According to Stephen Hawking, Alan Guth, and Roger Penrose, the odds of that perfect balance, where matter neither recollapsed nor dissipated, were approximately 1 part in 10 to the 60th power. That's a 1 followed by 60 zeros. And that number? It only accounts for the 5% of the universe we can see, not the other supposed 95% that evolutionary scientists claim exists as dark matter and dark energy, both completely invisible and unmeasurable, in order to account for all the other things we see in the universe which go directly against their evolutionary model. But science, true science, doesn't begin with speculation. It begins with measurement. The patchwork theory known as inflation tries to account for these mysteries, but it doesn't explain why space-time appears so perfectly flat, why the outer edges of galaxies spin too fast, or why the universe isn't just expanding, it's accelerating. By their models, none of this should be happening. Yet inflation is treated as fact, the reigning theory, even though it has no known cause and no working mechanism to achieve such an impossibility. Even still, inflation alone wasn't enough to save the failed theory. Now, to make the math work, there must also be dark matter and dark energy, invisible, untouchable, unmeasurable, making up the vast majority of the universe. Why? Because they've already decided. We must have come from an explosion of nothing. Even though the very scientists who laid the foundations of physics and astronomy, men of towering intellect, believed in a creator themselves. They didn't force the data to match a godless paradigm. They believed in a God of order, and used that understanding to discover what could actually be tested and measured. It was under that premise they made groundbreaking discoveries. Not by chasing the wind of wishful thinking and concocting theories hidden behind smoke and mirrors, which can never be tested or verified, but by seeking to understand the thinking behind the design and finding the precision in every place we turn our attention to. As the famous Johannes Kepler said when studying science, "I am thinking God's thoughts after him." It would seem that there are indeed two invisible forces at work when it comes to why the hearts of men search for any other answer as to our cause of being, rather than a creator. One, a deep desire to dissolve moral accountability. Do whatever you please, there is no God who judges. And the other, which is like the first, the simple refusal to be told what one can or cannot do from a higher power. Often, both of these sentiments are well funded by those with similar desires of being their own God, rather than submitting to one. As the saying goes, nearly all scientists agree with those who sign their checks. Even with all of these shakiest of foundations being treated as settled facts, without cause, without mechanism, without reason, somehow everything exploded from nothing, at just the right rate. And the four fundamental forces of physics, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, gravity and electromagnetism, all happen to exist in perfect harmony, and to a very precise value of strength. So precise, in fact, that if any one of them had been altered by the tiniest degree, the result would be utter chaos. No galaxies, no stars, no planets, and no life. Let's set aside for a moment the claim that 95% of the universe is made of unseen and unmeasurable material, and instead focus on just the 5% of visible matter, the stuff we can actually observe. Even that, just that 5%, demands a cosmic explosion of unimaginable precision. As it was just mentioned, physicists calculate that in order for all matter in the universe to exist as it does, the energy of that initial blast, what they call the Big Bang, had to be fine-tuned to 1 × 10⁻⁶ power. But it gets worse. Roger Penrose estimated that the entropy of the early universe had to be fine-tuned to an even more absurd degree, which is written simply as 1 in 10 × 10⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻⁻³ power. To give you an idea of the size of these numbers, estimated grains of sand on Earth, roughly 10 to the 20th power. Stars in the observable universe, roughly 10 to the 24th power. Atoms in the universe, roughly 10 to the 80th power. Penrose's number is not 10 to the 123rd power, it is 10 × 10 to the 123rd power. If every atom in the observable universe was a typewriter, and each typewriter typed 1 trillion zeros per second, every second for 13.8 billion years, you'd have to repeat that process a Google times. You would finally reach the size of this number, and the level of fine-tuning it would take to perfectly set the entropy of the early universe. And remember, this was only talking about the 5% of matter we can see and test. And yet, we just ignore that. Just like we ignore the fact that we still can't see the ends of the universe. We actually have no idea how big the universe really is. And just like we ignore the so-called young galaxies, we observe sitting at the very edge of what we can see, galaxies that shouldn't be there if deep time models were true. All of it, extremely hard on the current theories, all of it, extremely inconvenient. So, continuing on with these statistics, we will only focus on just that 5%, and only that first value of the precision of the Big Bang, 1 × 10⁻⁶ power. Let's try to understand the size of this number and put these odds into some sort of understandable perspective. Let's talk probability. 1 chance in 10 to the 50th power is already considered statistically impossible in physics and mathematics, and 1 chance in 10 to the 100th power is considered a mathematical zero, no chance at all. Imagine dropping 100 coins at once. The odds of all 100 landing heads up, roughly 1 in 1.27 × 10 to the 30th power. That's already absurd. You'd have a better chance of winning the Powerball lottery 10 times in a row, and even if you dropped 100 coins every single second, since the supposed beginning of the universe, 13.8 billion years ago, you would still almost certainly never be close to seeing it happen. And yet, the odds we're being asked to accept for the Big Bang are drastically worse. 30 orders of magnitude worse. Let's keep going, not forgetting all the impossible odds we've already covered, but setting them aside for a moment so we can examine some other extremely critical facts. After this supposed explosion of nothing came everything. And somehow, it all flew outward at precisely the right pace, with a mysterious burp of inflation from an unknown and unthinkable cause. And just like that, the cosmos was filled with a flat space-time continuum, stars, gases, and a fully stocked periodic table. These gases, instead of dispersing outward into equilibrium as all gases naturally do, somehow reversed course. They began to attract each other and formed the very first stars. Except, there's yet another problem, besides defying the laws of thermodynamics. A massive problem. Every current theory of star formation requires that stars already exist. This doesn't answer the cause, it simply moves it down the line and hopefully right off the stage and out from under the limelight. They are attempting to explain how the first stars formed, while relying on models that require stars to be there before stars existed. A cosmic chicken and egg dilemma. And yet this glaring contradiction is rarely, if ever, mentioned. But we'll ignore that too, so we can move on to planets. Supposedly, the newly formed stars were soon orbited by clumps of matter that somehow formed planets, which just happened to find themselves at just the right distances, with just the right momentum to fall into stable orbits. Is it too early to mention that if Earth gained or lost a few hundred miles per hour, life would end almost immediately? We'll get there. But here's something you can observe today. Every planet in our solar system orbits the Sun in the same direction that the Sun spins, and they all orbit within a common, nearly flat plane, like a vast cosmic merry-go-round disk. That sounds simple enough, but the math is not. You don't have to dig too deep to discover that the accepted model of solar system formation doesn't hold up under the smallest scrutiny. They claim the Sun formed, dust clumped, clumps formed planetesimals, and boom, a solar system. But how is that actually possible? Well, with everything we understand and have verified about momentum, it isn't. According to the law of conservation of angular momentum, anything ejected from a rotating body should retain that body's spin pattern. And yet, here's what they won't tell you. The Sun holds 98% of the solar system's mass, but the planets, they hold 98% of the solar system's angular momentum. That's not just a small problem. That's a fatal contradiction. That's because when two bodies of vastly different mass are spinning together and then separated, the heavier mass should retain most of the spin. But in our solar system, it's the opposite. The massive Sun barely spins, while the lighter planets are racing. That's not just unexpected, it's backwards. And yet, our current explanation requires the solar system to begin with a spinning dust cloud, orbiting around a newly forming Sun, which, oddly enough, needed other stars to have formed the Sun in the first place, stars that conveniently no longer exist. This cloud of dust was somehow able to spin down the Sun, while simultaneously spinning up the planets. And all of this while arranging them neatly in a perfectly flat orbital plane, landing them in insanely precise orbits. In the vacuum of space, where there's very little space clutter to disrupt the orbit of a planet. We're told this all happened naturally. And yet, as I briefly mentioned earlier, if Earth's orbital velocity were altered by just a few hundred miles per hour, our orbit would catastrophically destabilize in a matter of only thousands of years. We desperately need our orbit to be exactly 66,616.16 miles per hour. So, thank bang for that. But let's not stop there. Why does Venus rotate the opposite direction of Earth? Why is Uranus tilted off-axis, spinning 98 degrees on its side? Why does Triton, a moon of Neptune, orbit in the entirely wrong direction, as well as spin the wrong way along with 8 other major moons? And let's not even get started on the short-period comets locked in unstable orbits, orbits that couldn't possibly last more than 10,000 years. All supposedly sourced from the entirely theoretical Oort cloud. That's right, the Oort cloud has never been seen. It was simply invented as a much-needed rescue device to explain why these comets still exist, because deep time scenarios simply can't account for them. The same is true for the infamous yet underwhelming Kuiper belt, which lacks anywhere near the material required to explain the comets we can actually observe. It's like walking into a garage and saying, "Aha! This is where all the cars on the freeway were built," even though there are only 3 tires and a lawnmower. What we find in this belt is embarrassingly undersupplied. Nevertheless, the theories prevail, because, as they say, we know it happened. Dust formed, dust bumped into dust, dust became clumps, clumps bumped into clumps, and somehow formed planets, even though, after a certain size, space rocks don't stick together. They shatter one another. They don't form bigger ones, any more than shooting lots of bullets into the air will eventually result in cannonballs forming. And yet, somehow just enough of them survived to bind together and form worlds. In Earth's case, a planet with a molten iron core, generating a magnetic field so perfectly tuned that it shields us from the Sun's constant assault of coronal mass ejections, solar energetic particles, galactic cosmic rays, X-rays, ultraviolet radiation, and microwaves. It is very fortunate that we are stuck to this particular rock, which just happens to be spinning at the perfect speed of 1,000 miles per hour, and orbiting the Sun at just the right rate, in a beautifully circular path, not elliptical, which would either fry us or freeze us to death. Thank bang for that precision, or else we'd all be goners. Oh, and Earth also just happens to be tilted at 23.5 degrees, giving us seasons, swirling the tides and stabilizing our climate. Without that precise tilt, we'd degrade into climate chaos in just 75 years. And it would only get worse from there. We wouldn't even last hundreds of years. Again, as stated before, if Earth's orbital velocity were altered by just a few hundred miles per hour, our orbit would catastrophically destabilize in a matter of only thousands of years. Want to check these numbers for yourself? You no longer need to be a polymath. Go ask an AI engine. Run the math. Even though modern AI has been trained to accept the evolutionary paradigm, it can still give you honest calculations. And when it does, check the numbers. See for yourself. In the past 200 years, it would seem that the desire to deny a creator for the purpose of moral freedom has taken quite a foothold and is thriving in our society. But as for those who just want to know the truth, see the honest data, and are willing to consider the entire equation, without fudged numbers or biased inputs crafted to force a desired outcome. The truth is impossible to hide, and the math doesn't lie, if you're just willing to sit down and work it out. In the next video, we'll be looking at the complexity of microbiology, where the odds of life spontaneously coming into existence get even worse. As usual, like and subscribe so you won't miss it.